I'm adding this to a video I made last night. So most of the video I will be wearing another sweater. That's so you know what's going on. And I'm adding this because I've been looking at the news about the appalling situation in Los Angeles with thousands of people left homeless and without lives, without histories, everything in their lives destroyed, and in some cases their lives too. This is absolutely... There was a terrible, heartbreaking story of a woman who had a semi-disabled son who she couldn't carry him, she couldn't lift him, and she had a broken arm. And the water had been switched off, so there was no way she could rescue her son or save the house in any way from the fire. And it was horrifying what's happened. And I'm going to be reading you letters from people in England whose lives, or talking about people whose lives have been destroyed by the people they're elected to look after them, the councils, basically. Sometimes actual corruption, well, sometimes with the possibility that it was actual corruption, other times absolute abysmal incompetence, mostly from the idea or from idealism of social engineering idealism. That's probably more likely. And lives destroyed by this. If you multiply it, it will be the same as what's happened in Los Angeles. But in Los Angeles, it's happening all in one go, and it's just appalling. Well, I've used that word before. I can't think of anything else to talk about the horror of what's going on in Los Angeles right now. But the fact is, it was a sort of laziness, a mental laziness, an idealism. I mean, they're talking about this fish, but it wasn't only this little, a smelt, a tiny fish, that they were restricting water in some way so that the fish could breed. I don't know the nuts and bolts of that story, but what was happening was that a stupidity had engulfed all of the governing classes of California. And because of that, Victor David Hanson was complaining that water was being misused and not renewed, and that water sources were becoming more and more poisonous as farmers were digging deeper wells into, areas where the water was brackish, possibly, that sort of thing. Right, well, I just had to talk about what's happening right now in California. And I'm sure that this will cause a complete change in the Californian government. At least I have very sincere hopes that it will. And it's just an example of how things have to get so terribly bad and lives lost before things change. And I'm bringing it back to Britain because I was talking about that in the rest of the video. And I am very much afraid that things will have to get to that sort of level before the people, politically speaking, rise up and never have anything to do with this sort of socialist, idealistic, short-sighted nonsense again. All right, well, yeah. On with the rest of the video. Hello. I'm going to be reading you 3 or 4 comments that appeared under my video. Well, under a couple of videos, actually, but they're all about the same thing. They're about grooming gangs, and they're about the way neighbourhoods are changed, sometimes semi-forcibly, and the dislocation that this that happens in this sort of situation. I do read almost everything in the way of comments under my videos. Sometimes people send me emails with stories in them, and since they are private communications between whoever it is and me, I never read those out without permission, and possibly with some editing to remove points that might identify the writer, because obviously the writer doesn't want to be identified. But in any case, I always ask for permission on that one. But if you've put it in the comments, then I reckon that's in the public domain. Okay, so let's read this one to start. Oh, yeah, I almost forgot. I'm Granniopteryx. I'm on YouTube, Rumble, BitChute and Minds. And this is the first post. I'm writing this as a victim who has given evidence in court that led to a conviction. After I made my statement to Bedfordshire Police, so I assume the young woman or the girl, whoever it was, went to Bedfordshire Police and reported the crime. And this is what happened to her. After I made my statement to Bedfordshire Police, the investigating officer and her sergeant threatened to arrest me for threatening behaviour. Well, look, I wasn't there. No, I have to make a caveat to this. I'm reading what people have written here. They may not be telling the truth. I have no way of checking that out. I'm reading stories I feel appear to be true. They appear to have a reality based on what I know about other situations, but I do have to remind you of that. But I can quite believe that the investigating officer threatened to arrest this person for threatening behaviour. She might have been a bit combative, or even a lot combative. I mean, just think what she'd gone through. So I don't think that Bedfordshire Police are come out smelling of roses on this one. Sorry, I'm still coughing a bit. So the investigating officer and her sergeant threatened to arrest me for threatening behaviour. So this person who has been abused already is now being abused by the police. I would have dropped the issue because it was obvious Bedfordshire Police were trying to protect the child abuser. But an officer from West Mercia Police Force took the case on as one of 51 known cases against this man. He was convicted on all cases and sentenced to 21 years. Now, she doesn't give the race or religion of this person, so let's not jump to conclusions. It doesn't matter in this case, actually. This was somebody who abused her, and for some reason, this young woman felt that the police were protecting the abuser, whatever his race or ethnic origin. But because a West Mercia police officer was also after this person, he was convicted on all cases, which would include hers as well, and he was sentenced to 21 years. She says he will be able to apply for parole in the next 6 years. After a subject access request, I found Bedfordshire Police are still keeping the accusation of threatening behaviour on my police record. And then she says more victims need to speak out. The grooming gang fiasco is just the tip of the iceberg. Well, I think we know it's just the tip of the iceberg. And I think we know that the Labour Party, in voting against the idea of a general investigation they're trying to keep this suppressed as well. I'm quite sure of that. The point about this particular communication is that somebody abused her, whoever, and the police were somewhat less than helpful to her, and they accused her of being aggressive towards them. Well, if they were not believing her, I can imagine that she was showing a certain amount of asperity. The fact is, the man was an abuser, and another police officer was involved in chasing him up as well. And that's the only reason that this girl got some sort of justice. I don't think that having a record of being abusive to the police, threatening behaviour, it says here, oh dear, that's misspelt, let's get that straight. Threatening behaviour, that's not justice. Now, here's another post. 1970s, yes, 1970s Oldham. So this is somebody who went through this in the 1970s. After my old age pensioner uncle with terminal cancer complained about daily harassment, my dad drove over. So he drove over to the uncle's place, which would have been the chap who was writing this, it would have been his father's brother, wouldn't it? My dad drove over and was so shocked he impulsively took the couple that same evening. So obviously the person who's writing this, his father went to visit his sick brother who had been complaining about some sort of mistreatment from neighbours, and he was so shocked by the situation he saw that he took the old couple away that same day. It must have been pretty awful. He took them to a different council. It says here different council, so no support. I am assuming that he took them to stay with him, at least for a while, but couldn't get any support from the council because now they were in different territory. I don't know, it doesn't say how he managed thereafter. When my uncle died and his wife with dementia was rehoused, we went back to clear their house for sale. My dad put some furniture outside while sorting and found the neighbours going through it. When he asked them, did they want to buy, they answered, when you've gone home, we'll take it anyway. Now, he doesn't give the ethnic origins of the neighbours, but from the rest of the message, we can assume that they were what's termed South Asian, of some sort. The house went for peanuts, as the street wanted a homogeneous street. So I'm assuming from that they were Muslims. And they wanted the whole street to be Muslim, so they made the place look, the house for sale, look as bad as possible when people who weren't Muslims were looking at it. Absolutely merciless, he said, when in the majority. And that was in the 1970s. There's another post. I know of 2 shops in a particular area of my city where their windows were regularly smashed. One a butcher's, the other a motorcycle shop. After each incident, their insurance premiums increased until eventually they gave up and moved out. Now those shops are the generic sort of shops you see in such areas. I don't know what that means. Again, I am assuming that this person here is talking about Pakistani Muslims. I might be completely wrong. What I am reading this out for is not to say that all Pakistani Muslims act like criminals, or are criminals, or are bullies, or are antisocial. No. But a lot of people will do what they're allowed to do. If the police don't show control in a certain area, then you will get the rougher element of certain groups acting badly. And this is not so much a problem of Pakistani Muslims as of policing and the will to enforce good behaviour, neighbourly behaviour, that sort of thing. Now, another one. I was born and grew up in Dewsbury, West Yorkshire, in the 60s. It used to have its own town council. In the 60s through to the early 80s, it wasn't a bad place to live. Dewsbury was sort of a working class area in the environs of Leeds. And many working class areas were extremely respectable, neat and friendly places. I know that because I was brought up in that area. The thing is, they had their own small town councils. Sometime in the late 60s or the early 70s, the government decided it was going to rationalise things. Things were going to be bigger. They were going to be more efficient. Of course, that never works out. Local councils work best when people know each other, not when they're great big great big mechanisms. It happened all over the country. They did all this sort of thing. A lot of little town councils were closed down and amalgamated, and this was supposed to make things better. It really did make things worse. Anyway, Dewsbury became part of Kirklees Council, which has been a predominantly Labour council since. In the late 80s and 90s, it was very apparent that the local Pakistani population was taking over, and they've subsequently ghettoized some previously very pleasant areas and turned them into a wasteland. Well, I don't know what he means by a wasteland, but we do know that, Pakistani culture does not involve usually a lot of gardening, and there's a less fussy attitude to rubbish in the streets or cars parked all over the place and that sort of thing. And so by Yorkshire upper working class standards, the neighbourhood would definitely not have improved in elegance. On an evening, the town centre became the playground of groups of young Asians tear-arsing their cars round the place. It was also noticeable in the 80s that they used to pester groups of young girls. They've always been into running drugs, plying underage girls with alcohol, pimping, prostitution and extortion. OK, look, I'm telling you what this person says. Now, he may be lying through his teeth. He may be a really nasty person who wishes to calumny a minority group. But if we look at what has been going on, what's been revealed in the grooming gang scandal bits that have leaked out, and if we look at YouTube videos of what's going on in Birmingham fairly regularly, then, there is a lot of bad behaviour there. And again, it's a matter of enforcement. They're just not letting the police, and the police don't have the will to enforce better behaviour. And because of that, various groups have grown up thinking, various groups have developed over the years, each a little worse than the ones that preceded them, simply because they can get away with it. I'm going back 40 plus years when I refer to this, so it's not surprising to see what the place has become now. The continual blind eye turned to this behaviour by the West Yorkshire Police and the council are no doubt partially culpable. Frankly, I would say they are 80% culpable, because, for instance, young men do tend to act badly, especially when they're in groups. And they stop acting badly when they know they can't get away with it. And if there are lots of young Asian men all in groups and they think, it's a common enough thing. In India itself, they call it Eve teasing, don't they? They think it's really funny to pester girls on buses and in public places and that sort of thing. And, get into groups. And there have been some horrific crimes against women in India. And no doubt in Pakistan, although possibly not so much talked about, because things like that tend to be kept quiet in Pakistan for various cultural reasons. So that is a habit, that is a cultural characteristic. But it wouldn't happen if the police acted like police. Anyway, if you're in a position of authority, know something wrong is happening and you ignore it, you're just as guilty as the perpetrators. And yeah, the council could have done something about it. The police could have done something about it. Instead, they let things get out of hand until they couldn't do anything about it. The last post here, Adams Down in Cardiff had a similar experience. It's near the city centre and so valuable land. The houses were occupied mainly by elderly people who'd lived there for their whole lives. In some cases, they were the last of several generations. Council started housing ex-convicts, asylum seekers and people with mental illnesses in the area. Street by street, the residents were forced to sell. Police could do little to control the downward slide, having been allocated only 2 coppers based in the local station. So again, this is the council's fault. Now, what you will see as I read the rest, it looks very much to me as if this was a deliberate policy on the council's behalf. They wanted the area cleared, and so they used people with problems to clear the area for them without them getting their hands dirty. And there might even have been a monetary advantage to this for individual councillors. We'll just read the rest. Even they, the police, now having been allocated, there were only 2 coppers based in the local station. Even they became scared to police there. Taxis stopped going to some of the side streets and gangs harassed the elderly residents. The council did nothing, and you have to ask why. You may have your answer in the next couple of sentences. The council did nothing. The police did nothing. The houses plummeted in value and were bought up by friends of the councillors. So, this is what this person says. He may be spinning a lie. But, well, frankly, I don't think so. I think the council, there was some hanky-panky going on there. But of course, I have no proof. I can't say that for sure. Anyway, the houses plummeted in value and were bought up by friends of the councillors. After that, the tower blocks crept in, supposedly for student accommodation, but priced high even then. After a while, retrospective planning started to be given to convert the units to high-priced private accommodation. It all sort of fits in, doesn't it? Well, I thought you'd be interested to hear that. I know that some councils are very corrupt, and it's quite possible that we are seeing an example of that here. The problem is how you deal with that when people keep voting for the same corrupt councillors. That's a problem of democracy that we all have to think about. Okay, till next time. You can help my channel by subscribing and clicking the notification bell. That's quite important. And by sharing if you're so inclined. Links to my other channels and to donation methods are in the description. But the best way you can help is simply by clicking like and notify. Thank you.